Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 63. The first book today is Franklin Pierce by Michael F. Holt, 2010. It's a short book, only 133 pages. Franklin Pierce was the 14th U.S. president. He only served one term, elected in 1852, served from 1853 to 1857. He's considered a failure for some have judged paving the way for the U.S. Civil War. He was a New Hampshire native. Franklin Pierce was handsome, charming. He had been a brigadier general in the Mexican War, and at age 48 was the youngest president at the time. He tried to buy Cuba from Spain unsuccessfully. He was born in 1804, died in 1869. His wife Jane was sick and depressed. So that was he had a tough marriage because of his wife's illness and depression. And major reason was they had 3 sons who all died young. Very tragic. He signed the Gadsden Purchase, which actually completed the continental United States, the map as we know it now, along the southwest. Franklin Pierce was an alcoholic. He died of cirrhosis of the liver. Tragic. His father, Benjamin, was a Revolutionary War hero who was with George Washington at Valley Forge in that very tough winter during the Revolution. Pierce was a friend of the famous author Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote the two famous books, The Scarlet Letter and House of the Seven Gables. Pierce was a successful lawyer due to his memory of names and faces, his personal charm, and deep voice. So he had a lot of talent. His father was governor of Virginia. Pierce opposed slavery, but also abolitionists for their arrogance and impatience. See, I think there's a real lesson here. Obviously slavery was wrong, but the abolitionists also were wrong, I think, because the way they acted. They thought, they started acting like Southerners were all sinners, or anyone involved with the slave trade was a sinner, and if you didn't agree with them right away and join with them, then you were a sinner too. And so they're very intolerant. I mean, the cause they were fighting for was right, but they turned off Franklin Pierce, among others, in the North because of their bad attitude. The worst thing that happened, 2 months before his inauguration, he was traveling to Washington, D.C., I believe, he was on a train with his wife and son, Ben, who was 11, and there was a bad train derailment, and Ben was killed. Terrible. It was, right in front of his eyes, and so he was starting his presidency with this horrific tragedy, their last son, whom they had lost, and which made his drinking worse and his wife's depression worse. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 prohibited slavery north of the 36 degrees latitude. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for the possibility of slavery in Kansas. Pierce did not work for a compromise between North and South. He actually supported the South, even though he was a Northerner, because he was charmed by the Southern charm. So that affected him, and also, like I said earlier, he was turned off by the abolitionist movement because of their arrogance and impatience and so forth. So, very tragic man, and it was a tragic era in American history. On the moving toward the Civil War, and he was in office. He left office about 5 years before the Civil War started. The next book is America, Imagine a World Without Her by Dinesh D'Souza, 2014, 257 pages. Dinesh D'Souza, I think, is an amazing fellow. He's an immigrant from India, and he's become a real expert on American history. He's a very, very strong conservative. He's one of the leaders among conservatives, and he's very pro-American. As I said, he's conservative politically, and the book promotes capitalism. And he mentions the 2 key years in American history, 1776 against 1968. 1776, the original, our revolution, and 1968, really a kind of a revolution to a communist revolution or a leftist revolutionary year. And he makes the case that the United States is a great country, and he's against the progressive movement. And he believes, he says that we must fight to save America from the forces of evil. He believes that, that we could have a communist revolution simply on a gradual basis, that the government grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and it all sounds good because, they're protecting the environment, and it appeals to lots of people. They're helping helping different people who need help, and the next thing you know, the government has total control of our lives. And he talks about how Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are students of Saul Alinsky. Now, he's an interesting fellow to study. He wanted to destroy America. Alinsky didn't believe in America. He was a strong leftist, or you could say really a communist. He says that Ward Churchill, can't remember who that guy is, believes America is an evil empire. This book defends entrepreneurs, those who create businesses and succeed and have to deal with with devious politicians. This is a very interesting topic. The question is, the leftists or the strong liberals will say, these evil businessmen, these guys are terrible, and we need to, but their whole point is, or they imply that people in government are morally superior to people in the private sector. And the thing is, the private sector actually has to achieve. They're accountable. Otherwise, they go out of business. The guys in government don't have that accountability. You get these good government jobs and so forth, and no matter how much you screw up, you can continue because the government won't go out of business. So the government has an unfair advantage and it's really a struggle for power, you could say. And we've been on a long trend where government's growing bigger and bigger. Taxes have gone up, and regulations are up. So I think this is amazing that this guy Dinesh D'Souza is an immigrant from India, and he's very, very pro-American, and he really knows American history. He's written some other books. I really admire him a lot, and he went to prison because of for political reasons, because of his conflict with President Barack Obama. Really, really amazing, and I really believe in him, Dinesh D'Souza. God bless him. The next book is The Taste of War, World War II and the Battle for Food by Lizzie Collingham, 2011. It's a long book, 501 pages. Very interesting. During the First World War, folks in Russia, Germany, and England were very hungry, which led to a loss of morale, which affected the war effort in those countries. And this led to the rise of science, the science of nutrition, as governments began to focus on feeding the public for the national good. You can't win a war if the morale is bad. So in the Second World War, this led to a better food for the poor in Great Britain. Americans ate well during the war. That wasn't much of an issue. The Russians really suffered the most. They were cold, dirty, and hungry, yet fought for their lives. This talks about what Russians went through. My gosh, that their homes were not heated very well or heated well. Their places of work, these factories, were not heated, and they weren't getting enough to eat. They were malnourished and hungry, and there was very little soap, so they couldn't even bathe. And they were working long hours in these factories to promote the things to fight the war and weapons and so forth, and they'd have to travel to work, and they weren't getting. So it's really horrific. And then the Japanese, they fought the war half-starved. It's amazing how hard they fought, and they were really malnourished. So this book talks about how the governments decided that we've got nutrition's important. So it's the study. They started studying. What do people really need to eat in terms of fruit, vegetables, protein, and so forth. Very interesting book. The next book is Titan: The Life of John D. Rockefeller Sr. by Ron Chernow, 1998. Wow, what a book. 676 pages. This was given to me by my friend Bob Kinsey. John D. Rockefeller moved to Cleveland, Ohio as a young man. He started the Standard Oil Corporation and became the richest man in the world and the richest man in history. Initially, he produced a kerosene for lighting, and later gasoline for automobiles. He was demonized for his wealth and oil monopoly. As a philanthropist, he pioneered scientific and medical research and eliminated hookworm in the South and the whole country. He promoted education. His son restored Williamsburg, Virginia, which was the old capital of Virginia, and a scene of a lot of Revolutionary War activity. John D. Rockefeller did an awful lot of good with his money. This is an amazing book. In fact, I would argue that the life of John D. Rockefeller could be used to discuss or debate capitalism and the virtues of capitalism, those who are anti-capitalist, because one of the amazing things he did, he made all this money, tremendous amount of money, and as I said, he started off with kerosene, for lighting, and then eventually electricity came in, and kerosene was no longer, wasn't going to lead to, would not be profitable anymore. However, kerosene is a product of petroleum or crude oil. And another product is gasoline. And around the time that electricity came in, the automobile came in. And automobiles require gasoline. But his initial fortune was made from kerosene for lighting. And then, it was amazing. And then they really became known for, and he became known for gasoline and producing gasoline to the public for automobiles. And then all this money he made, he was demonized simply because he was so wealthy. And he moved to New York City eventually. But he did it so much good. In fact, I would credit John D. Rockefeller with giving us the medical care we have today. Because 100 years ago, during his time, the early 1900s, medical care was really bad, and it had been bad for a very, very long time, horrible. And Rockefeller had all this money, and he thought he had a very simple thought. He said, he decided to hire scientists to study disease, with microscopes and to study the chemistry of disease, the science of disease, and also to study, to research cures for diseases. And this is what changed medicine, that scientific research that he did, because these fellows, these scientists learned to, what was really going on with various diseases, and they came up with cures, including hookworm, which folks in the South, they didn't know. They were all basically out. Most of them were sick. You get it through the bottom of your feet. In the South, it's warm. The people were poor. They didn't have shoes, and they were all sick. And he had a real challenge trying to convince Southerners to take it. Was the medicine that the scientists came up with was very cheap and effective, and it eliminated hookworm. It took a while for Southerners first of all, they didn't know that they were sick. They just folks thought, Southerners are all, lazy people. And they weren't lazy. They were weakened by this parasite that they all had. And this had a tremendous effect on the American South because by the elimination of hookworm, Southerners had all this energy, much more energy, to be productive, to work, and to think better. And an incredible thing that John D. Rockefeller did for the American South. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., basically spent his entire life as a philanthropist, spending the Rockefeller money, trying to find good things to do with it. And his wife got into modern art, and Rockefeller money went into creating MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which John D. Rockefeller Jr. hated. So he thought, my God, this stuff is terrible, because, it's a lot of people, it's not traditional, and some of it's kind of crazy, and I personally don't really like it myself. But anyway, he went to this MoMA opening, and it was a funny scene because, you had there the guy running the place. It was Rockefeller's money, but he didn't respect the guy, and the guy knew that, but he had to be respectful to Rockefeller Jr. because they put up the money. And before he was married, he was courting this young lady, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and he had some graham crackers in his pocket, and she put her hand in his pocket to take out one, which was a little bit, kind of romantic. And so this is an amazing story. John D. Rockefeller Sr., who did so much did so much good, and people think he was ruthless in business. Well, that era was pretty tough, and but the bottom line is he provided a lot of employment, and he provided a very high quality product that was needed for automobiles, and he did so much good with his money and that's still true. So an amazing story. God bless John D. Rockefeller. I think one of the greatest people in world history. The next book is James Buchanan by Gene H. Baker, 2004. Very short book, 152 pages. Buchanan's the 15th U.S. president. He was elected in 1856, served from 1857 to 1861. He was from Pennsylvania. It was rumored that he was homosexual, but it hasn't been never been really proven. He never shaved. He did not need to shave for whatever reason. He's the only bachelor president. He never got married, and even though he was a Northerner, he also became friends with Southern congressmen, similar to Franklin Pierce. And again, he was charmed by their gracious, charming charisma and became pro-South, and basically encouraged the establishment of the Confederacy. So you could say some have charged that he was close to being a traitor. He sided with the illegal pro-slavery forces in Kansas. And James Buchanan is considered a failure. His failure was part of the road to the American Civil War. Although, to be fair to him, I think the Civil War was going to happen because, we had this... the suffering that happened in the war, I think, was payment for the bad karma of what we had done to American Indians and to Africans, African slaves. But and Buchanan's time in office, basically he just didn't do anything to try to. But I don't know if he could have done anything because I think the Civil War was going to happen anyway. The forces in the North that were against slavery were growing, and the pro-slavery forces in the South, based on the profits being made from cotton through slave labor, and also for the fear of Southerners that if freedom came for slaves, that they would seek revenge. So a very interesting topic, James Buchanan. It was nice. I read another book about Harry Truman, who was president in the 1940s, who was a real historian. He talked about James Buchanan, and he was very sympathetic to him. He also he had this thing called walleye. His eyes would not look in the same direction. He'd look at you. One eye'd be going one way, and it would be kind of skewed. So he was an interesting guy, another tragic fellow, you could say, James Buchanan. And I'd have to say, God bless James Buchanan, a man who served his country well, regardless of the mistakes that he made, which were definitely significant. The next book is Frost on My Mustache by Tim Moore, 1999. This is a story. This guy's from England, and he traveled in the footsteps of Lord Dufferin, who traveled in 1856 to Iceland and Spitsbergen. So this is basically a story about this author's trip in Iceland. He cycled across Iceland, so with a bicycle, and a lot of humor. Spitsbergen, which is this Arctic island, is very bleak. Coal mining and too much drinking. So a lot of humor here. He had a tough time at one point. I know he had a close call. In his travels, I think he ran out of food, and he finally made it into this town, and where he was half starved. And he made it to a restaurant. And he got into this warm restaurant, and people were in there, they're just living their lives, and they're, talking and eating. And he almost started crying because he was, so grateful, so happy, to be that he was going to get something to eat, and he's out of the cold. And really, I think this is a very good book because, Iceland, what an interesting place, in the very far north. So I recommend this book. The next book is Lincoln by David Herbert Donald, 1995. This is a tremendous book. One of many biographies, if you're interested, of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th U.S. president who served from 1861 to 1865. He was elected in 1860 and reelected in 1864, although he served only a very short time, maybe about a month into his second term before he was shot and killed. It was Lincoln's task to prosecute and win the American Civil War, a war which could have been lost, and if so, the United States would have been divided into two countries. The U.S. Civil War was the worst nightmare in American history. Lincoln wanted to end the war, but it went on and on and on, and the death and suffering was horrific. I think like 750,000 Americans died. Then finally, Lincoln, who was a good man, who was a prayerful man, he finally came to the belief that God wanted the war to continue. And he said this, quote, "God wills this contest, and wills that it shall not end. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." He's talking there about how the suffering that American slaves had been through, that was bad karma, and karma meaning everything good and bad comes back to us that we do. And there had been this very bad thing that had been done to so many African Americans for so long, and we had to pay for it, and we did. That's what he came to believe. He believed that's why the war went on so long, to pay for the sins of slavery. Lincoln kept America one country, and I think that was a very important achievement. If the Union had lost the war, if the Confederacy had broken away and we had become two countries, I believe we could have become 3 or 4 or 5 or more, and we could have ended up like Central America or South America, which is divided into many countries, and therefore they're very weak because of that. Interesting thing that he mentions is 200,000 African American soldiers served in the Union Army and helped win the war and end slavery. So an amazing man, Abraham Lincoln. He came from very humble circumstances, very poor upbringing, and he was always interested in learning, and he used to get in trouble with his father because they had a lot of work to do at home and on the farm, and his father would catch him reading books when he should have been working. But anyway, and then he worked very hard as a lawyer, as a country lawyer, a lot of travel. His wife Mary, they had a good marriage. She was somewhat troubled, I'd say, but still a good person. A lot of tragedy. They had 4 sons, and three of the 4 died young. So he had to prosecute that horrific war, but I think he did the right thing. He could have easily given up and let the South go, and brought peace, because a lot of folks in the North wanted that. Like I said, if we had become 2 countries, we could have broken up into 3 or 4 or more. Then you'd need a visa to go to Florida or California. And I don't think we could have played the role we did in the Second World War in defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan if we were not one united, powerful country. So God blessed Abraham Lincoln, a man who served his country well, a tremendous person, and one of the greatest men in history. The next book is Andrew Johnson by Annette Gordon Reed, 2011. This is a good book. Andrew Johnson, was the 17th U.S. president. He became president. He was vice president for Abraham Lincoln, and he just finished that term from 1865 to 89. So he served close to 4 years. Andrew Johnson never went to school. No school. Grew up extremely poor, eventually settling in Tennessee. Although he was a Southerner, he remained loyal to the Union, and this is why, Tennessee was sort of a swing state, and he remained loyal to the Union, and this is why he eventually became Lincoln's vice president. During the war, he became the military governor of Tennessee. After Tennessee was, I believe early on it had, gone for the Confederacy, but then it was occupied by Union troops, and then he was this military governor. Johnson was president. His presidency was a disaster because he acted unilaterally on Reconstruction and ignored Congress. He refused to protect the freedmen, the newly freed slaves, from attacks by hostile whites, furious for losing the war and murdering blacks at will. Johnson wanted white supremacy over blacks restored. So you could say this was pretty bad, Andrew Johnson. He's the guy that he was impeached, meaning they had a trial to remove him, although he was not convicted. So Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton are the 2 American presidents to be impeached. Neither was convicted. And yeah, he was, his failure, you could say, was that he had grown up poor in the South, and then these wealthy Southerners came to visit him after the war, powerful people, and he kind of enjoyed that. So he decided to help restore them to power, and it was a very tough time. The war was over, and he was in a very tough situation here, and he could have done more to help the African Americans. And I think he was racist, and he was not interested in helping them. And there was, the war was over. There were so many bad feelings. He was impeached because there were folks in the North who wanted to really punish the South. So this was all very tragic, a very tragic time, because the war was over and Lincoln's leadership was really missed. So the story of Andrew Johnson, who was another you could say a very tragic man, because he was rags to riches. He grew up very poor, and then he worked hard, but I think there was failure here in his presidency. God bless Andrew Johnson, who served his country well and also not so well. There's another, the next book is Andrew Johnson, a biography by Hans L. Trefus, 1989, 379 pages, much longer than Annette Gordon Reed's biography. Again, the 17th U.S. president, and he worked as a tailor, and he prospered. That's how he got it, made a pretty good living. He became mayor of Greenville, Tennessee, later state senator, American congressman, Tennessee governor, and he had a very strong personality. He was very brave. He promoted the welfare of the poor working man, but the white people, but not the African Americans. During the Civil War, he was loyal to the Union. He promoted the Homestead Act, which was free land for the poor. He believed in frugality. His wife was sickly, and his son, who was an alcoholic, committed suicide. Very sad. Again, his failure was his racism and his refusal to help the freed slaves after the war. His Secretary of State, William Seward, negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia. So that was a big deal. Yeah, they have the Seward Peninsula in Alaska named after him. That was controversial. A lot of people thought, why are we doing this? Why are we buying this big chunk of ice? And that was one of the best things we ever did, because Alaska it's been a very helpful and important part of our country. After his presidency, Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate. During the war, he was loved in the North but hated in the South because he was supported the Union. After the war, he was hated in the North but loved in the South for his actions. He lacked wisdom and humility, a strong, honest man. So it appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. God bless America, the Philippines, and the whole world. God bless you. Thank you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.